Hello and welcome to Türkiye Talks. This week we are going to talk about the latest violent incidents in France. After the shooting in Paris, a local community center was attacked by an extremist and 3 people were killed. And after that, we have seen PKK terror group members or sympathizers. They actually put Paris in fire. Today I am joined by Klaus Jurgen, welcome, sir. And Kadir Ustun. Kadir.
Hi.
So let's start with the incidents in Paris. I want to start with you, Klaus, because you are a European. You've been in Europe, in different countries in Europe. What was your first reaction? Because, Turkey for many years warned European partners about the possibilities of violence because of the PKK and other terrorist networks in Europe. Now it was visible. We have seen cars were turned back, they were in fire. These people attacked stores, other people. So what was your first reaction to that?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and pleasure to be in your company. Now, my first reaction was, of course, a shock. And then basically what I told myself is, this is something we should have seen coming. And Turkey was warning its European allies for so many years that the PKK is not a problem only affecting or impacting Turkey. The PKK is a global terror problem and has to be addressed as such. Now, Turkey is doing what it can to erase the threat of terror on its own soil across its southern borders. But over the decades, so many activists found a safe haven in many European countries, France, Belgium, Germany, where I was born, recently United Kingdom, and many others. I'm just mentioning a few. They basically set up shop, started illegal business, money laundering, human trafficking, drug trafficking, setting up media houses, publications, staging manifestations and demonstrations, lure local young people into the mountains. I think this is the only way to say it. Most of the young people, if we mention the proud Diyarbakir mothers and fathers perhaps a little bit later, most of them were lured into the PKK networks and cobwebs from within Turkey. But even in Germany, there were cases where activists would attend meetings, and one mother in particular demonstrated outside the German parliament some time ago. And she is a good example, a sad example, but a proud example. Not she is sad, but the topic is sad, that the PKK doesn't stop from nothing. They are active on European soil. And now in Paris, if I still have half a minute, they say the well-being of citizens of Kurdish origin is at risk in France. They say exactly the same in Turkey, fake news 2.0 before the new year started. And then they justify their violence either against the Turkish state or, in this case, innocent people in France, and to say we have a just cause, we are freedom fighters. The PKK neither in Turkey or France or anywhere else are freedom fighters. It's a terror camp.
Kadir, is there any reaction in the US? Because between Turkey and the United States, one of the major issues is the US support to YPG, which is affiliated with the PKK. We know that many people, not only from Europe, but also from the United States, they joined this organization under the banner of fighting against Daesh, ISIS. But we have seen that even the former US President Donald Trump called them as Marxist organization, and also he himself was critical, although he he couldn't stop the central command to support the PKK. Is there any reaction to the incidents in Paris, or they just ignore it?
Well, I saw a statement by Secretary of State Blinken about, the Kurdish community in France. He sent his condolences because the incident was a, racist attack by some, right-wing 69-year-old French citizen against this Kurdish community center that is known for, having sympathizers with the PKK and all that. What happened is that, they first started demonstrating against the French government for not protecting them well enough, and then it turned into anti-Turkey demonstrations in Paris and in London also. In London, they, went to the Turkish embassy, and they even threw some stones at the windows. And they injured some 30, French policemen. Police was, like you said, they put cars on fire, and there was a lot of violence in Parisian streets. And you saw the reaction from Turkish leadership saying that, for years, like Klaus mentioned, we've been warning you about these groups, these pro-PKK, either sympathizers or also members throughout Europe, and now they're causing trouble in your own streets. And, this is a long-standing problem. And Europe is coming to terms with, perhaps only recently, in taking security matters more seriously. And we've seen that with the influx of refugees after the Syrian crisis. We've seen this with Ukraine crisis, Ukraine war. Europeans are being pushed towards taking security matters more seriously, because for a long time they allowed, sort of terrorist propaganda, terrorists organizing under the cover of civil society organizations for a long time. They tolerated that, saying, this was freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and all that. And those principles are valuable, and they need to be protected. But then there are abusers, and there are those who fundraise and, recruit people. They send foreign fighters into the Middle East, from Europe. And this has been a long-running problem. But we discussed this many times. The U.S. support for YPG includes some European countries as well, including France. President Macron actually met some members of the YPG, the PKK Syrian branch, and, showed sympathy with their alleged fight against ISIS. And we can discuss how that fight is effective and how much of it is actually, U.S. and European action against ISIS. And we've seen recently this group in northern Syria has said they were gonna, shift focus maybe away from fighting against ISIS if Turkey conducted military operations. So, long story short, like Klaus mentioned, you mentioned, this is a problem. European countries have to take a more serious look at this, and we've seen that with Sweden and Finland's NATO membership debate as well. Turkey brought up the fact that, either terrorist group members or terrorist group sympathizers are being allowed to run free on European soil, and it will come back to bite these countries. Unfortunately, it's not something, we should be celebrating at all. But this is a serious problem, and most of these countries are NATO members. They need to have collaboration and cooperation within the NATO structure as well as outside that structure. So the funny thing is PKK is also designated as a terrorist organization by the EU itself, and the United States. So I don't want to make this too long, but we just keep coming back to this problem that needs to have a much better European solidarity approach towards Turkey's concerns.
I wonder, Klaus, if you can tell us your opinion about it. After this incident took place, I mean, after this guy killed 3 people in the community center, the PKK and its political wing was quick to blame Turkey. Even the person was captured. People were waiting for his statement, and they even didn't wait for the result of the investigation, and they started blaming Turkey. And also, 2 days after the first big violent incidents, I have seen another protest movement, another march to remember the dead. They added 3 more photos to the victims of this attack, and they were the PKK members who were killed some 9-10 years ago. So it was very manipulative, and they kept blaming Turkey in this. And all these took place in front of our eyes. I wonder, will it be an eye-opener for the European media or European public to see that? Because, I mean, it was clear attempt of manipulation, although the truth was visible and accessible to everyone quickly. What do you think? People saw that?
Well, I think it would boil down to, you mentioned the media, indeed. I once wrote, somehow sarcastically, cynically, a few years ago, that fake news about Turkey are apparently in high demand. And some of my esteemed colleagues in mainstream media in European countries seem to wake up in the morning and say, what can I write negatively about modern Turkey today? I'm not a psychologist. Sometimes I wonder why my own generation does not accept that in a country which became a role model for so many achievements and reforms, had to struggle like every other nation. Talk about my own Germany. Democracy didn't come overnight to Germany, you know? So I fully respect, in particular, the past 2 decades, what has happened in Turkey. The only problem is we still have a generation of political leaders, we mentioned this before, who are former student movement leaders. The former Swedish foreign minister, who I happen to know personally from my younger years in Brussels, she herself always defended human rights, democracy all around the world. The only problem was they mistook one country and the threat posed by a terror organization, aka PKK, as another worthwhile cause. The international solidarity movement, not only confined to socialists, the liberals did it, the Greens do it now, many conservatives too. Now take the media into account. Many of my generation work in the mainstream media in Europe, having had the same background, that every fight against the establishment is positive. And they never understood the one difference between the PKK not fighting for freedom. They never set foot onto the ground and spoke with the local people who are, integration is the wrong word, it is one country, take Turkey. There were people of various different backgrounds living happily united on Turkey's soil. And they never wanted to learn. They said, no, we can't change our mind. They have a right, let them manifest, let them demonstrate. Basically, it's a Turkey problem. We don't want to interfere. Big mistake. By not interfering, they allow the PKK to prosper. And to prosper means to attack, first of all, Turkey, and secondly, as we witnessed now, France and, God forbid, other countries. So yes, I called it a wake-up call only yesterday. And a fine colleague asked me, are you really sure? Was it a wake-up call? I said, I am an optimist. ultimately society must understand this is not a Turkey problem, but it is a problem which can happen anytime, any moment on our soil. Let's address the issue. What can be done by society, by schools, by educators, by the media, by politicians? When will they finally take Turkey's fight more seriously? And a good point, Kadir already mentioned it. Of course, we have NATO enlargement. I fully agree that Turkey should not simply tick it off and say back to business as usual. This is the perfect time to say, look, we've done our bit. We had a terror problem, soon it will be erased. Now we want to help Europe that it doesn't spill over to you, but you must help us, please, in erasing these bits and bobs and underground organizations active on your soil. Last point, if I may, it's not only underground. German intelligence last report 14,500 known sympathizers of the PKK in Germany alone. The hotspot for money laundering. Finally, it is out in the open. Will the media pick up on it? Well, here comes my optimism, hopefully.
Well, Kadir, maybe we should also question the future the European countries have a lot of problems when it comes to the immigration, economy, also the energy crisis, the Russian threat perceived by especially Eastern European countries. So when we look at all of these issues, Turkey stands on a very important location and can help resolving all these problems. We know how Turkey acted when it came to the immigration crisis. Also, Turkey is the easiest way to bring energy from the Gulf region to the Western countries. Also trying to play a role between NATO and Russia, find a way, if not a mediator, as a facilitator, to find a way between the two sides. So after all of this, this PKK issue is poisoning the relations. When I look at Turkish, let's say French relations or Turkish-German relations, we see that this PKK issue is poisoning. If we didn't have this problem, maybe we could talk about other things, more positive, more cooperative. Do you think European countries will realize this situation after this vandalism in Paris, or do you think things will go on like this for a few more years or decades, maybe?
I want to be hopeful, just like Klaus. I hope so. The recent signal for that was, actually President Macron brought some 30 countries to start a dialogue, political dialogue beyond, outside, including countries outside the EU, and that was a positive development because, Europe has been realizing with Ukraine war especially, and the Trump era where Trump even spoke about leaving NATO, right? Europe is recognizing somewhat slowly that security matters. Security and freedoms, democracy balance is a challenge for all countries, including Turkey. And it's important to strike a balance. But for a long time, Europeans looked to the other side of the Atlantic for broad security issues, strategic issues, and they worried more about internal, perhaps, democracy and freedom of expression and freedom of speech, all of that. But now I think there's more recognition that geopolitics matters, security matters, and these things Europeans have to create strategies on their own. Of course, because of the EU structure, things take long, but this is an alliance. European Union is an alliance that sets standards, that creates standards that can stay, and not in all arenas, but EU is a standard-setting institution in many ways. So if they can think long and hard about how to, care about common security issues, and realizing that you can't just do that in among EU countries. There are regional issues, like you mentioned, refugees coming from, or irregular migration coming from North Africa, Middle East, and then there is traditional, conventional geopolitical challenges posed by Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I think they just don't have much of a choice but recognize that Turkey has to be a strong partner here. And I think Merkel, for instance, recognized this and, kept the communication channels with Turkey strong. But that was somewhat also a reactionary thing to the crisis. So it was still, I think, a positive development. So let's just hope that you sit down and create long-term strategies that are not just crisis-oriented, but think about, right, how to define the the line between terrorist activities and democratic activities, including freedom of assembly, speech, etc. So that's just one of the questions. I want to be hopeful, like I said, but this will take a long time. I recognize that, but for Turkey, it's a much more urgent, much more sort of hot issue. It's along its border. It's inside its borders. Several weeks ago, there was a bombing in the heart of Istanbul. We talked about this as well. So these things should not come to your capitals to start thinking about them. So,
well, this week another important incident took place. We know that Turkish defense minister met with the Syrian counterpart in Moscow, and one of the issues was a possible operation against terror networks. This is what Turkey actually looking for. Do you think this will have an impact on the European agenda? Let me explain a little more. We know that in the Western media, Western networks, whenever something happens related with the PKK, they are ready to use the word Syrian Kurds or Kurds interchangeably with the PKK, but maybe outsiders are buying this rhetoric, this narrative. But we know in Turkey, this terror organization, terror network doesn't represent the Kurdish society in Turkey. Same in Syria. We know that right now the United States is working with the YPG and PKK under the banner of SDF, and they control a huge area in the eastern part of the Euphrates River, which is actually a Sunni Arab-dominated area, but right now it is controlled by this terror group. So it seems that right now we came to a point that the Syrian regime as well, they are going to try to get back this territory probably. They want to get rid of this terror network, which became a tool of U.S. policies in the country. So do you think that this meeting between Turkish and Syrian defense minister will open a way which will weaken the YPG PKK in the region? Do you think this will happen? And if it happens, do you think it will have an impact on European attitude towards this organization? So,
Okay.
long.
Okay. Well, let me be frank about this. You may know I did quite a bit of work, like we all do, about a number of issues, but the YPG in particular is a problem which it doesn't leave me alone. Now, very often I go back to General Raymond Thomas, who infamously once said to the YPG, you have got to change your brand, his own words, made in Aspen, Colorado. Why did he say this? Because he knew about Ankara's worries, rightful worries, that the YPG is basically a branch of the PKK, only in different clothing. Now, then he said, again quoting, I remember he said then, I had this stroke of genius, referring to himself, to put in the word democratic somewhere, hence the Syrian Democratic Forces were born. Now, they were not born because someone Googled or went onto Wikipedia, because a US general told them to do so because he knew about the worries and concerns in Ankara. Now we all realize that Washington is still supporting and flirting with the YPG, and I think this is absolutely horrendously wrong. The meeting you mentioned, now Syria and Turkey, of course it can have a long-lasting effect, because what many Europeans don't seem to fully grasp is the link between YPG and PKK. And if this can be dismantled, we already are one step closer to telling our European friends, please, say it like we do, PKK/YPG. They're not up for anything good in Syria. Of course, the Syrian regime ultimately wants to have territories. And ultimately, they want to have peace. We can argue about, yes, will there be a 30 kilometers corridor? Will it be 30 miles? Will the corridor at one time no longer be necessary because there is simply no more terror across Turkey's southern border? But I think it is a good idea that Turkey steps into the ring as well. And now it should tell European friends and NATO members, look, we do not want to dictate you our opinion, but we have our opinion. Please listen, please come and discuss with us. This is how we can imagine that peace will return to the region. How can peace return to the region, dear friends and colleagues? Of course, only once terror has been wiped out. We can't say, okay, now it's fine for another 6 months, and then something bad erupts again. It has to be stopped once and for all. I think it can. I shouldn't stress the word optimist twice, but about this meeting, I'm rather optimistic that people in Europe will actually listen. I only want to mention a new government in Sweden. We spoke about Germany. We mentioned France. They have very good intelligence too. They will be following events for sure. And I can imagine the European Union soul searching. You mentioned dear Kadir, you mentioned the new geopolitical reality that Europe has to face. Of course, Europe needs a new identity, be it enlargement, be it geopolitical, be it climate crisis, be it Ukraine. Europe was focusing on building its peaceful house Europe for decades. The generation European Union, first the EEC, then the EC, and then the EU. The outside world sometimes didn't exist. You had to create the internal market, the four freedoms, and what have you, your own currency, by all means. All of a sudden, this peaceful world doesn't exist anymore. We mentioned the migrant influx. We mentioned many other problems. Now we have a world which is volatile, and all of a sudden we have terrorists strike on European soil. Now, who would have imagined that only a decade ago? So I think, yes, it is possible there will be a process of reasoning starting in a fair number of capitals. And why not let Turkey and Ankara become the engine behind it? People always say France and Berlin were the engine of building this house Europe. Let Turkey become one of the key engines of bringing peace to the entire region.
Well, yes, we'll see if it's going to happen or not. But Kadir, I'd like to get your views also on that meeting. Maybe we should look at the European and US attitude. How will they react? Because I remember when this Syria crisis started, it was the French president, I think Sarkozy, convened a meeting in Tunisia, Friends of Syria, and they started this civil war in the country by supporting the opposition parties. Now we came to a point that there is no winner, although the Syrian regime seems to survive, but they lost 1/3 of the country, and terror groups are everywhere. The US is controlling most of the eastern part. Right now, Turkey is recalibrating its foreign policy. There is rapprochement with Gulf countries, with Egypt, with Israel. So do you think this Syria connection or contact will change the balances in the region? And do you think the Western countries, especially the US, would welcome this meeting, or we should expect negative reaction?
Well, to be able to assess that, we would need to know what the U.S. policy in Syria is, and we don't exactly know that because, Biden administration announced that national strategy paper, but so far they haven't announced any kind of Middle East policy or Syria policy. And what we look at on the ground to determine what the policy is about, it's about not leaving the ground to actors like Russia and Iran and continue the fight against ISIS. These are the official kind of declarations by the U.S. officials. It doesn't really amount to a larger Syria policy, to be honest. So it's hard to assess what they want to do with the regime. There's a lot of voices that says we shouldn't empower the regime, we shouldn't normalize them, we shouldn't lift sanctions on the regime, etc. So what Turkey is trying to do, I think, concretely, one, this has been several years now, one, to try to block the regime from creating more chaos for Turkey, because, if they attacked certain areas in the northwest, they could create more refugees, more displacement, and that could cause a lot of headache for Turkey. And then the PKK, sees options such as, if the U.S. were to decide to leave, they could just turn to the Assad regime and ally with them. So I think Turkey is also trying to take that possibility or option away from the PKK group. Again, we come back to the PKK-YPG issue and how the US and Europe deals with that. That's going to be a long-running problem, but, Turkey, one, intervened there militarily directly to prevent further enlargement of PKK areas, in PKK-controlled areas. Two, he's now talking to the Assad regime to probably achieve certain things on the ground. I don't think there's a big political discussion just now. It's more probably tactical and on-the-ground issues, which forces are where and what to do, what not to do. But the most important political long-term fruit for Turkey is probably to prevent the PKK from having more options than, US and Europe and Russia and Iran, perhaps.
Well, the PKK has been a challenge, a national challenge for Turkey for decades. Now, after the Paris vandalism, the PKK vandalism in Paris, we are talking about the PKK challenge in Europe. So I think it should be understood by Europeans, and I hope it will be an eye-opener for the European society or European leaders, European media. Thank you very much, Klaus, and thank you very much, Kadir, for your time.
Thank you, Bora and Klaus.
You very much.
See you next time.